what did you make of this much anticipated, this plan released by the Prime Minister today?
Well, Kieran, let's start with the moment. Finally, after months of talk, 2 weeks of division, a fight to narrowly get it through the Nationals party room, years of climate wars, Scott Morrison announces a net zero emissions climate change target for Australia by 2050 to take to Glasgow.
Our plan for net zero by 2050 is the plan that I believe Australians want, because it gets it right. It's not a plan at any cost. There's no blank cheques here. It will not shut down our coal or gas production or exports. It will not impact households, businesses or the broader economy with new costs or taxes.
The Australian way, he called it, the PM. A policy Labor announced months ago, but with a plan behind it. The argument behind the Australian way being we meet the targets, the other countries don't.
I'll be taking this plan to COP26 for our target to achieve net zero by 2050. It will be supported by our updated projection that will see us exceed our 2030 target with emissions reduction of up to 35% by 2030.
For the press conference, a 15-page document initially. We heard Cabinet got shown a 900-page document. This afternoon, they have released a full 129-page plan. As we have reported for weeks, no change to the NDC, nationally determined contributions for 2030 for the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, even though the projections show that there will be a 35% reduction in emissions by 2030.
That's what we expect to achieve. Our target will remain as it is because that's the commitment I gave to the Australian people. It's as simple as that.
So that stays at 26 to 28% reduction, even though the projections say it'll hit 35, but a nationally determined contribution of net zero by 2050. The PM arguing just as we got the iPhone and those advances in technology, the same will reduce electricity emissions by 97% by 2050. All government has to do is enable it. The PM arguing Australians will be $2,000 a year better off because of the target Scott Morrison has set. We have revealed he showed polling to Cabinet showing 80% support for net zero until people were told it cost them $500 or more a year, after which that support dropped. The PM today welcoming the fact the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said his target was heroic.
Boris understands Australia. He understands that this is a different challenge for Australia than to other countries. And so he understands the significance of this. And he and I have discussed it on many occasions and at length. And so he understands that this is an important decision for Australia in making our contribution and doing the right thing for our country first. And he understands we're making this decision in our national interest.
The government has put the cost of hitting net zero as $20 billion at present, already committed through existing programs.
The plan draws together everything from our modern manufacturing fund, when we've got $300 million in carbon capture use and storage, we've got $2 billion for the critical minerals projects, we've got $464 million for the clean hydrogen industrial hubs, we've got $1 billion in the recycling modernisation fund, there's $550 million in the modern manufacturing strategy, there's $3.5 billion in the national water grid, $1.4 billion actually in building better regions fund. There's almost $2 billion in the Great Barrier Reef long-term sustainability plan. There's the Ag 2030 goal. There's the $5 billion drought fund. There's $6.4 billion commitment to skills and training. And so it goes on.
Of course, it costs them an extra seat in Cabinet for the Nationals as well. Kieran asking here, how credible is this when Barnaby Joyce, the Deputy PM and leader of the Nationals, not at the announcement, isn't even on board?
You make the argument that the economy's grown, exports have grown. How do you explain the Nationals' position then in that context? And doesn't the fact that the Deputy Prime Minister, he doesn't believe this, he told his party room he doesn't believe it, doesn't it undermine the very credibility of your plan?
No, this plan is 100% supported by our government. 100% supported by our government. It was resolved by Cabinet last night.
So if we talk politically, what is the PM seeking to do here? He's saying we've got a plan, the other mob haven't got a plan. We won't tax you, the other lot will.
They've got a target without a plan. They've got not even a target for 2030, let alone a plan for 2050. They have a plan to legislate people, to mandate people. That's not our plan. Last time they did something about this in government, they taxed people.
Well, for a few days we've known this announcement was coming. I thought one of the most interesting parts of the press conference was the PM basically confirming we are in for an election next May. Just like in 2019, he wants to do a budget first.
All of our policies will come out before the next election. In particular, there'll be a budget next year is our intention.
But as he finished up, Scott Morrison repeating the argument he prosecuted through the Black Summer bushfires. If China doesn't do anything on emissions, what does it all matter? And the only way to get China to act is through technology, he says now.
You know, if you really want to deal with this problem, it's not good enough to just tax people in developed countries and think that fixes the problem. Because I can tell you, China's emissions will keep going up. John Kerry said this himself in one of his first press conferences. He said America could reduce their emissions to zero, and if China's emissions kept going up, we don't solve the problem.
After the press conference, Kieran interviewed Energy Minister Angus Taylor and put to him something we have reported, that the right-wing Liberal representing Australia's interests at COP26 initially did not even want a target. The minister just wanted a goal.
Did you privately argue for a plan, for this plan and not the target? Was that your... Because the word out of the government was suggesting that you weren't supportive of a hard target. The Prime Minister was. Is that true?
I'm supportive of this goal, this target and this plan, Kieran, and people say all sorts of things, but that's what I support.
But you weren't convinced on the target throughout?
No, I've always been convinced. I've always been convinced that if you can get emissions down, keeping true to those principles, supporting traditional industries like agriculture, heavy industry and mining, as long as you can do that, then you should do it.
The PM pointedly asked at the press conference about the other leaders who have announced an ETS, a CPRS, a NEG, who were felled on the issue later, and why he will succeed where they couldn't.
Prime Minister, the last 6 Prime Ministers who held press conferences announcing climate policies either lost subsequent elections or were dumped by their own parties. What gives you the confidence that you'll be the first to argue through a climate policy and survive?
I've brought our government together on this. Our government is committed to this. Our government has come from difficult places, had hard discussions, but we've worked through it together.
Anthony Albanese quoting Dennis Denuto from the Castle and saying today wasn't a plan so much as a vibe.
Well, the Prime Minister announced a vibe today rather than a target. You weren't given any detail at all today. And, of course, we haven't been either. What we've said very clearly is that we would await Glasgow and what comes out of Glasgow before we finalise all of our policies when it comes to climate change.
So 2 major policies from the government for the election, Kieran. One involves 2040 target for nuclear submarines. One involves a net zero target of 2050 for climate emissions. But then I guess you could say, what are Labor's policies? Anthony Albanese promising today he will come up with something in the medium term on climate after Glasgow.